Hi, I'm Amy Wilkins, leadership coach, former media exec, and your host of Thriving in the Messy Middle. This is a space for women leaders navigating those in between seasons, the moments when things feel uncertain, stretched, or messy, and you're trying to find your footing without losing yourself. Some episodes are conversations with remarkable women leaders sharing the lessons they've learned along the way. And other times, it's just you and me, slowing things down and naming what's really going on. Think of this as a place to reset, reflect, and reconnect with what matters most. Because thriving isn't about having it all figured out. It's about learning how to grow, lead, and move forward, even when things feel messy. This episode of Thriving in the Messy Middle is a special collaboration with the Ad Club as a visiting podcast. And today I'm sitting down with Melissa Grady Dias, board member of the Ad Club and former CMO of Cadillac. Melissa has extensive experience leading teams across multiple industries and organizations, from entrepreneurial ventures to Fortune 500 companies. Prior to joining Cadillac, Melissa was at Jackson Hewitt, MetLife, and Motorola in a variety of roles. She's risen into roles of significant responsibility and influence, and what makes her so powerful for this community is not just what she's achieved, it's what she has navigated internally as that responsibility expanded. So, Melissa, I am so glad to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. I would love to have you share if there's anything I left out that you're just dying for the audience to know about you.
I think that the biggest thing about me that I'm so proud of and has really been quite a journey for me is I'm a pretty new mom. My son is 2.5. And, they say parenthood is the greatest job. It really has been extremely rewarding. And I think as I look back over my career and things that I've done, it puts a lot of light on different times. And, there's parts of being a mom leader in life that are very difficult, and there's parts that are easier. And I think a lot of my career, having waited, it was much harder, but also there were times that when that opened things up for me, it's interesting to reflect on today. And I'm working in a startup right now. And so that's been, I have done a few entrepreneurial things by myself before, but to work in a startup and take a lot of what I've known from big companies and now apply that to getting a business going has been really, really interesting. So I think those are some of the things that are ever present in my daily life that I spend a lot of time thinking about and reflecting on.
I would love to have you share a little bit about your journey to where you are now. Is there anything that you want to share about what that journey looked like?
It's really interesting. I think if I look at my journey, there are some things that have really driven me that I learned when I was very young. And I feel very lucky that I learned them when I was very young. I'm very driven by passion. I get very excited to solve problems. I'm also a builder by nature. So anytime there's something that is a big problem to be solved or something that needs to be built, that really energizes me. And even when I've been in bigger companies, it's been to build out new teams, to build out new programs, to drive new business. And that's really been the theme across each of those things. And if I look at the big moves I made in my career, whether that was between companies or between cities, I lived in New York, London, Chicago a couple times, and Southern California. And each of those was something that was me taking a leap of passion with a lot of fear, but letting the passion drive me and figuring out how I was going to go build something new.
Oh, you just said something that, I get really excited about. I love the word awe, like the idea that you can be super exhilarated and excited and scared at the same time, and that the combination is kind of magical.
It is. When I think about the things that I've done in my life and even some of the moments that were the biggest, if I use air quotes, successes for me, there was a lot of fear that was sitting inside of me with excitement. And those two things sort of equally drive me and make a lot of who I am.
Can you think of any time over your career where things felt particularly messy? And what came out of that?
There's a few times, and I think I have two that are on opposite sides, but I think really explain most of the messes that I felt. The first one was when I had a job that was good on paper. I joke that if AI had existed, as I was in a transitional moment in my career, I wrote down what I wanted my next job to be. If AI had created a job description for what that would be, that job description exactly came across my email. And I was so excited moving into that role. And it was something that from day one, everything changed. The CEO changed, my job changed, the team structure changed, everything changed. And in the end, it wasn't the right place for me. And there was a lot that came out of that mess for me. I think I've always defined myself very much through my job. And it really forced me to dig deep inside and to think about, well, who am I outside of a job? How do I have that guide me more strongly? I have several times in my life, and until I got pregnant, I used to go at least once a year to Northern Arizona, and I would just hike it out. I would just start moving. I would look around at the nature around me, whether it's spring, summer, fall. So anywhere from 30 degrees to 100 degrees, just hike it out and find myself and my truths in those moments. And when I left that job, I went to Arizona and it became one of the biggest pivots in my life that set me out on a course that had I stayed either where I was previous to that, or I had tried to make that work or done a few different things. Like if I had taken a job that was better than that one, I would not have, I think, reached the heights that I have in the same way in the same time frame. But there was a lot of breaking down that had to happen for me to get there. On the flip side of that, one of the other messiest times that I felt, and again, I jumped on a plane and went to Arizona, was when I was promoted into the CMO role at Cadillac. And I was so excited to use that word awe. I absolutely was. I couldn't wait. And I was so excited and I was so grateful for the opportunity and also so driven by the fear and the responsibility that I felt with this iconic brand that I couldn't let down. And that fear of like failing for those around me, I had to really center myself and think, how am I going to make sure that I'm successful and I do what it needs? And interestingly enough, because something that felt really something that I think, leaving a job and it being a big disappointment and getting your dream job that maybe you couldn't even dreamt of felt very similar to me.
What was the signal in that first messy, that earlier messy, that this was not the right place?
It's interesting because I ignored a lot of the signals. I think I'm a I'm a very optimistic person by nature, and I'm going to make the glass half full, even if I have to kind of look up through the bottom and distort so it looks like it's half full. And I spent a lot of time trying to do that. I think, the things that had motivated me about that job were changing. And I was rationalizing things to myself on why this was great. It's going to be great. This is, it's like when you start using the word fine too much, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine that it's not what I thought. And honestly, the first real signals, and it was a big growth moment for me. The first real signals, because of the dissonance between my brain and my heart, were physical. I am someone who tends to anxiety and panic, and that was starting to come out, and I started to feel those things. And so there were physical signals when I was ignoring the mental screaming that was in my face, maybe.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes until we actually notice the physical before we can actually listen to what we've been thinking or even telling ourselves about something. Yeah.
Something over time that's been very interesting to me as I look back over my life and I see things that my friends go through or that people I love go through, there is the when you start to know things and when you're ready to hear them. And it's so interesting that, when you're talking to another person, you can easily say, like, well, they're not ready to hear that. And you can see when someone else isn't ready to hear that. But it's a very interesting process when intrinsically you know something to be true, but you're not ready to hear it. And I still do that. I still do that with myself, but I'm trying to be better about recognizing that that's going on and saying, we're not ready for that right now, but let's not push that down into the Netherlands because it's not going to come out in good ways. So let's just like, let's figure out how we start to bubble that up and deal with it. But you're just not always ready in the moment. And I think age has taught me more that I'm not always ready. When I was younger, I would just distract myself out of those uncomfortable things.
I am curious about the Cadillac role and where things could be messy, even in moments of success and growth.
Yes. That that is definitely the one that was where I before I took the job at Cadillac, when I was laying out my 5-year plan for myself, it was I'm either going to start a business and own that, or I would love to be a CMO at some sort of startup or tech company, like someone who thinks like me. I'm very data oriented. I'm very performance and brand together, and I don't want to separate those. And it's just the way that I work. So that was sort of if you had asked me my 5-year plan. The opportunity at Cadillac came in, the job that I came into was not CMO, but the vision for the company at the time and the leadership on Cadillac and within the company was so strong that I was like, I'm going to go and see what happens if I try to build this. And I jumped into it with both feet, as I do, very excited. I was not expecting the promotion when it came. And so I don't know what preparing for it would have looked like, but I just remember I was so tied into the vision of Cadillac is going to return to being a tier one brand, and Cadillac's going to be the luxury EV leader. And those are very clear goals. And clear goals are great because you know when you hit them, but they're scary because you know when you don't. So that was a lot of just, I think I knew the job to be done. And it was hard for me to trust myself to be able to achieve those goals. And when I say trust myself to be able to achieve those goals, I think one of the most important things in life, at work, et cetera, is who are the people around you? Who's your team? And I had an absolutely amazing team there. And so I probably, had I really thought about that more, I probably didn't need to worry as much as I did. But it was a scary thing because I was like, I don't want to let down the people on the team. I don't want to let down the leadership. And I don't want to let down all the people who love Cadillac and want Cadillac. Everyone wanted Cadillac to win. And I felt it on my shoulders and it was heavy.
Is there anything that you would even tell yourself now, looking back on that experience?
It's interesting because I think that there's two sides of it, right? Because I put too much pressure on myself in life, in everything that I do. I put much more pressure on myself than anyone else puts on me. And I know this. I didn't necessarily know it when I was younger. I know it now. It's a good and a bad thing because that pressure does help me drive things to where they need to go. I think what I need to remind myself is to take care of myself along the way and remember to breathe, like literally just breathe it all the way in. Get that air in there and let it relax you because it's going to be okay. And I think I forget that sometimes And it's just been something throughout my life. I need to take the time. Meditation has really helped me to be able to calm and regulate my nervous system. And the thing about that is, and why I need to constantly remind myself of that, because, you could say, well, maybe that's good if you're driving all this success. Uh, I will drive the same results, but everyone around you feels your energy. And when you're coming from a place of strength and in that good, deep centered place, the people around you feel more centered and they can do their job better. You're helping them clear the way versus if you're, and for me, when I'm coming from what I call a place of spin, people around you spin with you. There's an archetype that I love, survive and thrive. And survival, they're both very fast. So if you think of wheels that are moving very fast, but when you're in survival, it's constantly coming from the amygdala, you're in fight or flight, and you don't know exactly which direction you're going. You're going fast, but it's like, are you on the path? And when you're in thrive, it's the same energy, but it's a flywheel and things are moving and there's a flow to it. And it's a really beautiful thing. And so I that archetype helped me because, you know, you're gonna get to your destination faster if it's the flywheel.
I'm curious if there was ever a time where you were noticing that your leadership was evolving or that there was something about the way you were leading that you noticed needed some change.
I have a I do there's a few times, there's several times, right? Because as a leader, you constantly have to be evolving and changing. One of the things I've talked about, and I will tell you the story where this became clear to me. One of the things that I think that's really hard as we grow in our leadership, when you start your career as an independent contributor, as a person who is just working for a manager, you are judged and you're doing a good job by the more you get done. Just produce, produce, produce. As you rise in your leadership, that becomes less and less important and how you inspire everyone around you. And so if you think about from independent contributor up to the C-suite, how you're inspiring those around you and how you're helping them to achieve what they need to becomes so much more important. And I love a good to-do list. I love to do things. And it was a very hard transition for me at each phase of leadership to understand what my role was. And early on, I remember I was in a job and I was working. I've had great teams everywhere I went. So it was like another great team. I had someone working for me who we came out of a meeting and I had been like, I'd been on fire in the meeting and I was like, this, I got this, I got that, just like answering everything, going through. And I was one of the more senior people in the room. And when we walked out, a person who worked for me looked at me and said, they already know you're smart. You don't have to prove you're the smartest person in the room. And it was a very important thing for me to hear at that moment. And it was something that has always sat with me of I still saw myself as like this person who could like, boom, boom, boom. I've got it. I've got it. Don't you worry. I've got it. And not realizing what that did to everyone else in the room. And it didn't give them the room to shine. It didn't give them the room to show what they were doing or how they were part of building what we needed to build. And it completely, in that one moment, sort of blew up what I was thinking. And over time, and I've always come back to that because as I get into any new role, or even sometimes when you take kind of, you have these reset moments. I think as leaders, it's very important for us to go into leadership development or different programs or to understand ourselves better. And whenever I go into one of those moments, I think about that and I'm like, what is my job right now? there's the goals, but what is my job and what is my role? And that moment taught me to be able to ask that, to be able to show up better for my teams. And I think that's obviously always a constant evolution, but I'm probably more prepared to hear what I need help with now and to better assess who I am and what I need to do.
I love that that person felt they could say that to you too,
I
because
am very grateful. Yep.
right?
It's funny because a few years later, I told him, I said, "Yeah, I have to thank you for saying that to me." And he said, "Oh my God, I said that to you." And I said, "No, I said literally am so glad that you did. So thank you." But I think it was probably just a moment of it was on his head and he, you know, I I always try with any of my teams and in any room that I'm in, what I always tell people is, and this comes from another piece of advice that I got early in my career. A company I was working for, someone very senior said to me about my boss, her biggest problem is she doesn't know what she doesn't know. And I get it a lot better now. As a young person, that was terrifying to hear because all I could think was, I don't know what I don't know. Nobody knows what they don't know. Like, I don't know what to do with that. But as I dug into that, and what has really also changed me as a leader is to try to find out what I don't know and to try to see what I don't see. And so, something that I've always challenged my team with is to say to me, I don't believe that, or have you like, we should look at this, to push and to argue with me. I really want people to argue with me. And what I say is the main thing that I ask you not to do is don't be the person sitting in the corner like, well, we knew that was going to happen. If you feel like that, say it to me. And I'm happy to I'm going to take it in. I listen to what everyone says and I love the contrarian point of view. It's going to help me form what we're doing and what we're thinking. And I've always said, like, I'm happy to be wrong. So I'm going to make a decision because we all need a decision. And we're all going to know where we sit with the decision. And like, let's think about it sort of like a game. Like if and there's the analogy that I love. Is this a one-way door or a two-way door? And most of the decisions we're making are two-way doors. So like you can make it a game. Great. Like you think that, I think this. Let's go see what happens. And I'm happy to be wrong. And I actually hold people up. Like we used to have something in our team meetings called like the big fail. We learn more from failure. And if we never fail, we haven't pushed far enough. So I'm always happy to make that be the environment and for us to have healthy debates. And again, if I disagree, I'm going to very respectfully disagree and say, like, let's see, and I'm happy to be wrong, but like you've informed my opinion and you've changed the way I'm thinking about it. And that's the best gift that anyone can give you.
Uh, that's a sign of a great leader that you created that kind of environment, because it's also where the most creativity happens, right? Like people have to be able to fail or they are guarded and holding themselves back. So I love that was your journey and what you experienced and saw as the most successful way to approach that. Let's talk about when doubt was creeping in for you. What helped you when you saw yourself like experiencing doubt?
There's a few things, and it depends on the scope of the situation that I'm feeling doubt in. But it does really come down to two things, and they are complete polar opposites. But I always say I am the person where left and right brain collide. And I'm not middle. I'm extreme left and I'm extreme right. And it kind of comes together. So the things that help me when I'm feeling very doubtful, the first is very woo-woo, like breathe, meditate, get in your body, like move, right? Like go hike, go get on a bike, do whatever it is. And the opposite of that is data. Like there are frameworks, there are instances, there's data backing things that will help inform. And so when I get myself calm and I listen to the data, that is where I get to a point where I'm like, we're at a reasonable enough place. The other thing I sort of play with myself in any decision is, okay, like if we do this, what's the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario? And so you can kind of lay that out for any part of whatever that thing is that's causing doubt, whether it's a bigger, oh my gosh, this job, or it's a smaller, am I implementing the right program, the right plan, the right whatever?
Yeah. And did you notice that over time that you were able to compress the amount of time you were experiencing doubt just by following that model that you just shared?
Yes. And I think that, again, I've given myself the space to trust my judgment a little bit more over time, but also to listen more widely, which helps me. Again, what are you ready to listen to? That I now can take in more and see more and hear more without it, I guess, affecting ego's not the right word, but like my inner, maybe fear, like that's sort of changed over time of, you get to the point where you're like, it's going to be fine. It's like
Yeah.
the I guess you go through enough things and, when you're going through first or when you're younger and you haven't been through things, everything can feel like it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so big. How will I ever get through it?" And then you look at what you've gone through in your life, what other people have gone through. I think just looking at people coming back from things, I mean, I think here's like a silly example, but one that I love. When you look at someone like Martha Stewart, like you could look at her and feel like when it was happening, it felt so big. And looking back, we're all like, really like, why did that happen? What agenda was that on? And look at her with Snoop Dogg right now, looking fabulous and living absolutely her best life. And I think it's like a good lesson for us of like, like, I aspire to be her.
To be that
And
full. I worked
yeah,
for her. I don't know if you knew that.
no, that's amazing.
Yeah, I got to spend 8 years with her. It was amazing. Yeah. So and I felt all the things that you just said, just the what it looked like to rebuild and recreate and just continue, right? To move. I love it. So, is there anything that has shifted for you in terms of the way you define success?
Everything, I think. I think everything. On the, looking back at younger me or whatever, I think younger me had no idea the potential that I had. And I think part of it was me being afraid to dream it and being afraid I couldn't achieve it. And I'm very thankful because there's been, and I was reflecting on this recently, there have been people in my life who've put me in a position and given me an opportunity that I was never going to ask for because I was probably afraid. And then I did bigger things than I would have guessed I could. I do think, I hope that the girls growing up today feel differently. I don't know how much of an impact my youth had on me. My mom always told me I could be whatever I wanted to be. But, you know, growing up in the 80s and 90s, there weren't a lot of female role models. And I had such a full circle moment at the Forbes Power Women Summit because growing up, my biggest role model was Judith Light on Who's the Boss. She was Angela kicking ass at the ad agency, living like this life that just looks so glamorous. And it really sat with me, which is funny because now I'm in a career in marketing. The other woman who was a bit of a role model for me was Terry Garr. And when I think about it, the only other kind of bigger role model I think at the time was Claire Huxtable. And law is just that's not where I'm going to thrive. My brain, I'm so thankful for the lawyers that surround me. And so I don't, I'm doing the thing I'm so passionate about, but I think about, wow, those were my role models. And I had this moment where I was able to meet Judith Light and tell her, thank you for taking that role. that was like a bit of a different role at the time, and for being the role model that you were. You gave me this vision of what I could hope to be. And I think we're in such a better place now. And I hope that young girls have those role models. But going back to how has my definition of success changed? I don't think that I would have dreamt of being in the roles that I've been in. I've traveled around the world. I've worked in a variety of industries and I've absolutely loved it. And I didn't dream big enough. So what does the future look like? I still don't even know. I still have a little bit of that. I'm probably afraid to try to figure it out. But I also have learned a long time, like the biggest definition of success for me is my home and my family and the friends I surround myself with and like the good life that I've built. Like you build your life. I think there's when I was younger, I felt and not in a negative way, but I felt like life happened to me. I was a passenger and you're the driver. And as soon as you figure that out, you're going to get on a better course, which is it's an interesting realization. I think, my husband and I had the conversation recently. We're sitting there and, you know, we had just had a wonderful day with friends and our son is here and we designed our home and we were sitting there and I met my husband much later in life. So we also have just a bit of gratitude because we saw a lot of what came before us. And we're like, wow, we built this. Like we've been together for, 8 years this year. And this is what we've built. And it was a really empowering feeling. And I think it's so important. As I've gotten older, I've started using vision boards to help me think about, like, to sit at the new year and what do I want? Like, if I'm just letting all the fear go, letting all these shackles down, like, what do I want and what does it look like? And when I started it, I actually was afraid to. I had these like it wasn't like a big vision board. It was like a little pencil drawing. And I went back to it a couple of years later and I was like, wow, I actually did these things. So now I have a giant, like it's probably like a 4 foot by 2 foot magnetic chalkboard. And I've put magnets on a bunch of different things and I move them around based on how I'm feeling. And I draw with this chalk and I kind of like think about, what am I trying to manifest now? What does it look like? And to be more intentional with it.
Oh man, I want to see that. That's so great. Is there any other advice that you would want to give a woman right now who's in the middle of something?
And I think the biggest thing is, and it sounds so trite, but it's really not, be more gentle with yourself. Don't take the pressure off because we have to do hard things. Like, I love that we say that now. Yeah, we have to do hard things, but don't make it so hard for yourself.
Yeah.
Don't just give yourself a bit of a break and make sure that you're taking care of yourself, which also, again, can sound very trite, but like I have this moment when that became very, very clear to me. My father passed away several years ago, and it was a difficult illness. He was battling cancer. And I remember when I was taking care of him, he had been in the ICU for a week. And I was just waking up, going to the hospital, going home, trying to get steps in, trying to still manage my job because it was a good distraction. They were amazing at the time, but it was a good distraction. And my father got out of ICU. He was stable. And I remember the following morning not having to get to the hospital so early. And I went to the gym and I worked out and I got my green juice and I sat in the car and I don't know what came over me. I just started sobbing. And my friend was like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I'm like, it just feels so good to have this minute. And I was like, I probably would have been better this week if I had taken one morning out of 5 and just had that moment. But I was too focused on everyone else and not myself. And you show up better. Like I wasn't yelling at people then. And I wasn't like, I just had I was a better person for everyone else. And it's so important to just give yourself those moments and don't be so hard on yourself. Like push yourself, but don't be so hard on yourself.
Yeah, you can do hard things and take care of yourself. Hey,
Yes,
both of those things can coexist. Oh, I love that.
exactly.
Yeah. Melissa, thank you so much for being here today. There are so many things that I heard you share. Pay attention to the signals. I loved the flywheel. We can be in survival mode or we can shift to thriving. And when we're thriving, it's a flywheel. And so there's momentum and we're moving. I thought that was visually, that's so great. And it's clear that you use a lot of mindfulness techniques like breathing, but also I liked when you said hike it out, right? So everybody needs to find their Arizona, I think, because
Yes.
it sounds like that was a place for you that was really, really supportive. To everybody that is listening, here's a reminder: the messy middle is not a detour. It is the development phase, and it's where the growth happens. So I want to thank the Ad Club for collaborating and inviting me to be a visiting podcast with this episode and for continuing to invest in leadership conversations that move the industry forward. And for anybody who's curious about the Ad Club, there will be information in the show notes that you can refer to. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope something you heard gave you a little clarity, or maybe just a sense that you're not alone in this season. The messy middle isn't something we pass through once. It shows up again and again, and each time we meet it with a bit more awareness, a bit more choice, and a lot more self-trust. If this episode resonated, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if someone came to mind while listening, share it with them. That's how this community grows. You'll find links and resources in the show notes and more ways that we can work together at chooseaw.com. And I'll leave you with this reminder: you are the most worthwhile project you will ever work on. So until next time, keep thriving, even in the messy middle.